In July 2017, I discovered my wife's brief, sudden affair that started on Facebook Messenger after they met at a work event. Their second meeting occurred a year after their first one, but there were no prior or subsequent interactions until he contacted her the Monday after the second meeting. Their initial messages were simple greetings, but they chatted on and off throughout the day. The next evening, he expressed his attraction to her, and although she initially brushed it off, he persisted. Within 2 hours, she admitted to being physically attracted to him. This continued until Sunday when he arranged a hotel meeting that turned physical. After returning home, she ended it that night, apologizing for letting it go too far. 2 days later, their messages resumed, leading to another hotel meeting the following Sunday. I discovered the affair when she accidentally left her Facebook logged in, providing undeniable evidence. I confronted her, and she immediately told him I knew and to never contact her again. The next day, I stayed home, emotionally shaken, while she went to her mom's for space, taking my car for a dealership appointment. The other man realized she wasn't at work and came to our house to see her, resulting in a confrontation on our front porch. I confronted him physically, causing him to lose control of his bladder and bowels. I sent a photo to my wife, telling her she could have him. I was arrested, but the charges were dropped because he refused to press charges, likely out of fear his wife would discover the truth, which she eventually did because I informed her. After 3 years of therapy, apologies, job changes, and her sincere efforts, I thought we had overcome our issues. This year has been the closest to normal I've felt in 3 years. Saturday night we received an invitation to a big party hosted by one of our friends. We arrived, and within 5 minutes, I spotted him across the room with an older woman I vaguely recognized. My wife saw him too when she followed my gaze. He noticed her, and in response, my wife turned and walked away. He quickly left with his date. I chose to ignore it, but my wife started drinking heavily. Later that night, she disappeared, and I found her drunk in the driveway. She was extremely intoxicated, crying, and mumbling. As I guided her to the car, she became angry and started yelling about how I had ruined her life and mistreated her in the past. I was taken aback by her outburst, but recalling what I had learned during our early separation, I decided to start recording on my phone. For about 5 minutes, she continued to curse at me, bringing up my temper and my past behavior as a husband. Then she said, "I can't believe you forced me to give up the love of my life, the only man who made me feel special. You beat him up, and now he'll never come near me again." This went on for another 5 minutes until she eventually passed out asleep. When we got home, I placed her in the guest room and went upstairs to try to sleep. In the morning, I had already made up my mind about getting a divorce, and I still intended to go through with it. She woke up late, wondering why she was in the guest room, and I cast the video from my phone to the TV, letting her watch it. To be honest, her reaction seemed genuinely devastated. She was shocked by her own feelings for the other man, but it didn't matter. Somewhere inside her, she still loved him, and I had reached my breaking point. I was done. The problem during my wife's affair, our children were 14 and 16 years old. They knew we had issues and that I had moved out, but I never told them the details. They are now 17 and 19. My daughter lives 2 hours away in the city for college, and she's been almost entirely self-supporting, except for school expenses covered by a scholarship and her grandparents' account. My son, who was staying with his cousin over the weekend, returned home on Monday to find me gone. In a last-ditch effort to salvage our marriage, my soon-to-be ex-wife confessed everything to both of them, and it didn't go well. My daughter won't respond to her mom, and my son called me, asking if he could stay with me. I'm currently renting a house from a friend in real estate. My son hasn't said much, he just wants some space, and I've told him that's okay. This morning, my daughter reached out to me, wanting to talk face-to-face when she returns home tonight. They've been talking to each other, but I'm not sure what they've discussed. I'm not sure how to help them through this situation. My wife keeps calling, but I've turned off my phone and bought a pay-as-you-go one. Only my kids, work, and my father have the number and know where we're staying. I've taken the week off to process this and consult with a lawyer. I usually work from home, so it won't be too hard to return, but I have many Zoom meetings, and I'm not ready for people to see me right now. My main concern right now is the well-being of our children. How can we help them navigate through this situation? I don't want them to harbor the same resentment towards their mother as I do at the moment. She's still their mother, and despite the consequences of her actions, they need a relationship with her as much now as they did when they were younger. Any advice on how to support them or at least avoid making things worse for them is greatly appreciated. As for some quick answers to a few questions people asked, there will be no reconciliation. The marriage is definitively over. Ito have a lawyer, and we're in the process of working on the divorce. The other man's wife was informed about the affair 3 years ago, and they are now divorced. My wife's reaction to the video seemed genuinely shocked at what she had said. She clearly has some issues, but the reasons behind it don't change the fact that I'm done. Regarding the altercation 3 years ago, he showed up that Monday morning expecting to meet her, but encountered me instead. I was arrested and held for 4 hours until my father posted bail. She went home after my father contacted her and cleaned up the mess on the porch. We didn't communicate for 12 days, during which I stayed at my father's home. I have no idea if she contacted him during that time or not. She claimed she didn't, and I found no evidence to the contrary. Despite the non-dramatic nature of the arrest, I hope we can move past that physical altercation. I'm somewhat embarrassed by it. She claimed he knew our address because during their phone conversations, he wanted to drop off a present before their second hotel meeting, and she gave him our address. However, one of the kids unexpectedly came home early, prompting her to call and tell him not to visit. I'm pretty sure it was an attempt for them to meet at our home, but I'm confident it didn't happen. We have video surveillance, and I checked the footage after hearing about it. Nothing was missing, and he never showed up. Financially, I earn significantly more, but she has her own income and retirement savings. I took control of all accounts, including hers, after the events 3 years ago. Likewise, she had access to my accounts, and we have complete financial transparency. Our house will be paid off in about 62 months, and we live in a stable middle-class neighborhood. Both of us work in industries that are recession-proof and apparently pandemic-proof as well, especially hers. I can comfortably sustain myself with personal savings for about a year, longer if I'm frugal. I dissolved all joint accounts, including credit cards, 3 years ago and changed my passwords last Sunday. Meeting with the kids, the meeting was understandably emotional. When my daughter arrived, there were hugs and tears for a few minutes. My son and I had brought food from a restaurant that our family enjoys, so we heated it up and sat down to eat and talk. Without going into every detail of our conversation, both of them expressed anger toward their mother and deep concern for me. I reassured them that I would be okay and that none of this was their fault or their responsibility to bear. I mostly listened to them, allowing them to talk and answering their questions honestly. One significant revelation was the timeline of how they were told about everything. My son spent the weekend at his cousin's place nearby. On Monday, he left the cousin's house and went to the home where he's part of a teaching pod. If you're not familiar with it, it's a neighbor who's opened her home to 5 school-age students for distance learning together. It helps keep the kids on track with their online work and provides structure and socializing, like an old-time schoolhouse with different grades. During lunch, my son came home and found my soon-to-be ex-wife there. He was clearly worried about her and her appearance, so she decided to tell him everything, no sugarcoating. He was in shock. He went upstairs to his room and called his older sister because he was concerned about me, and he shared what he had just learned. My daughter, in turn, advised him to call me, which he did. I arranged to pick him up. I'm only 15 minutes away. He left to meet me on the next street over from our home and texted my daughter that he was out of the house. She called my soon-to-be ex-wife and confronted her. I picked up my son and sent my soon-to-be ex-wife a text, asking her to respond with okay to acknowledge that she got it. She did, and less than 30 seconds later, she started calling. I turned off the phone, and it's been off ever since. I also found out that my daughter had already known about the affair from 3 years ago. About 3 or 4 months into our reconciliation, she overheard my wife talking to her cousin. She heard my wife explain what had happened during the affair, and it turns out she used this person as a source of support throughout the reconciliation process. I never knew any of this. This revelation bothers me deeply, as my daughter carried this burden alone for 3 years. I can't express how I felt when I learned about it. It also sheds light on her issues with her mother and her strong desire to be independent and move out after high school graduation. My takeaway from last night remains the same as it was yesterday. I'm deeply concerned about my kids. Both of them are carrying a mix of sadness and anger, but it varies depending on who you talk to. My son is primarily sad but has an underlying current of anger. On the other hand, my daughter is incredibly angry, almost frighteningly so, with just a hint of sadness that seems reserved solely for me. Her emotions seem clearly divided: anger toward her mother and sadness for me. My son's emotions are a blend of both when it comes to each of us. We had a lengthy conversation, and afterward, we shared some funny stories from their upbringing, none of which involved their mother. I encouraged them to consider working on mending their relationship with their mother. I explained that she needs them just as much as I do, and in the future, they will need her too. However, I emphasized that the choice is entirely theirs. I also suggested that they speak to someone about their feelings. My son is a bit hesitant but seems open to the idea, while my daughter plans to utilize the mental health clinic on her college campus initially. She wants to take this journey independently but has assured me that if it doesn't meet her needs, she'll explore finding someone through my insurance. One thing I observed last night, which I've always known but was especially evident, is that they are supporting each other through this challenging time. I'm not just relieved but also very proud of their bond. All in all, it was a profoundly sad night. Moving forward last night, I received a call from my dad just before my daughter arrived. My mother-in-law had reached out to him to check on me and the kids. She expressed her desire to speak to me and/or the kids, and I'll probably call her today. She's been a good mother-in-law, much like my late father-in-law, down to earth and no nonsense. She held my soon-to-be ex-wife accountable over the past 3 years. She also mentioned that my brother-in-law flew in on Wednesday evening, though I'm not entirely sure about the significance of that. My BIL and my STBX aren't extremely close, and there's a significant age difference. He's a lawyer, a real estate attorney, to be precise. We'll see how things develop. My father also reminded me that, at some point, I'll have to deal with my soon-to-be ex-wife, even if it's just for practical matters like paying bills and sorting out our son's things. I'll be contemplating that today. As I write this, it's around 6 a.m. My plan is to call my mother-in-law today and provide an update after that conversation. I anticipate learning information about my STBX that I may not necessarily want to hear, but I want to get that out of the way before the weekend. I'm tired of the drama and dwelling on it. My daughter leaves on Monday afternoon, and I'd like to spend the rest of my time this week and weekend with them in as much peace as possible. Once again, thank you to all the kind strangers for your help. I feel pretty good now that I've had those important conversations with my kids, but I remain concerned. I'll provide an update after speaking with my mother-in-law, but I may go quiet this weekend while I'm with my kids. That's where things stand. I'll be calling my mother-in-law this afternoon, and we'll take it from there. My son has returned to his teaching pod today, and my daughter has spent the day with friends, catching up, I suppose. I don't plan on bringing up anything about their mother over the next few days, but I'll be ready to discuss anything if they bring it up themselves. I'll also talk to them about visiting their grandmother. Therapy is definitely on the horizon. My previous therapist, whom I worked with after the initial D-Day, retired around 5 months ago. I'll explore my options for finding a new therapist. My daughter is determined to have her own therapist, and I'll need to take a cautious approach and carefully choose my battles on that front. She's become quite complex to me at the moment. I'm on shaky ground myself, and I don't exude the same level of confidence in their lives as I have in the past. Mill update: I had a conversation with my mother-in-law, and given the circumstances, it was as normal as can be expected. I won't go into every detail, but I'll touch on the key points. She naturally expressed concern for the kids and me. She also asked if it was okay to see the kids. I told her, of course, but it's ultimately up to them. I gently reminded her that if she plans on their mother being present, she should warn them in advance to avoid potential strain on her relationship with the grandkids. She assured me she had no intention of causing any problems and would make sure to visit alone. She inquired if I had any plans to divorce her daughter. I replied that, at this point, I wasn't comfortable discussing that with anyone, as I suspect anything I say might reach my soon-to-be ex-wife. She asked if she could share some details about what's been happening since I left the house, rather than just divulging them. After considering it, I told her to go ahead, but cautioned that she might not like my reaction or lack thereof. She said she understood. My soon-to-be ex-wife has essentially shut down, crying frequently and eating very little. She has attended 2 in-person therapy sessions and numerous online sessions since Tuesday. It seemed she had set an alarm to call me and leave voice messages and send texts every hour, but they managed to get her to stop this behavior on Tuesday evening. This repetitive action was what led my brother-in-law to fly back home. There was some talk about potential hospitalization, but that seems to have been put on hold. My soon-to-be ex has opened up to her mother about what happened, and it seems she didn't leave out any details regarding the video. My mother-in-law didn't comment further on that. My soon-to-be ex wants me to meet with her and her therapist in the coming days, emphasizing its importance. I was non-committal about it. She has committed to giving me as much time as I need, but feels it's crucial that I meet with her and her therapist as soon as possible. She has suggested opening at least a line of communication between us, such as email or text. I'm more inclined to agree with this, likely opting for email given that I can't stand to hear her voice right now. I mentioned this to my mother-in-law and said I would set some ground rules when the time comes. I'm uncertain about the meeting request. I don't foresee any positive outcomes from it and am leaning toward using email for logistical matters. I'm thinking of setting the following rules. Email solely pertain to household business and kids. No discussion of relationship matters. If she breaks these rules, I'll cease communication. If she starts spamming me with emails, I'll stop communication. What are your thoughts on this approach? Is it a good or bad idea? I'm feeling overwhelmed right now, and I truly wish this whole situation would just go away. I've composed an email outlining communication rules based on my earlier draft and some suggestions from others. I plan to send it on Monday after my daughter departs. My lawyer has already informed me about the worst-case scenario. Our minor son will turn 18 at the end of January, and his preference regarding where to live will carry significant weight. My brother-in-law being a lawyer doesn't concern me greatly. He practices real estate law in another state, so the worst he could do is offer a valuable referral. Regarding the physical altercation, I agree it was a mistake. However, it's in the past, and I have no intention of portraying it as anything other than a foolish act. This will be the last time I address it, as it has garnered more attention than it deserves, and dwelling on it doesn't benefit me, my children, or our situation. No offense taken, and I appreciate your perspective, Bigger. Unfortunately, it received more attention than it warranted in the grand scheme of things, and I wish I had left it out. Concerning the meeting request, I am still leaning towards declining. However, I haven't conveyed this decision yet. The reason for this is explained in my brief update below. I didn't delve into the details of our reconciliation process over the past 3 years in my initial post because it was already quite lengthy. In summary, we pursued every avenue I believed possible. This included individual counseling, a job change for her, a brief separation, only 12 days, but she moved to the den for about 4 months at my insistence, and no contact with the other person. We essentially started over and seemed to be making progress, albeit with ongoing challenges. There appeared to be genuine remorse and healing on both sides, at least on the surface. If it helps, I can provide further details later. Let me clarify his role as a vendor. His wife, now his ex-wife, owns a catering company where she handles cooking and planning. He assisted her part-time while working full-time, likely in insurance. His job on the event days involved overseeing logistics, transportation, supplies, etc., so his wife could focus on food preparation. My soon-to-be ex-wife works in the medical field at a specialty clinic, similar to one with multiple doctors, treatment areas, a 3-story building, and around 60 to 75 employees. They celebrate the clinic's anniversary each year as an Employee Appreciation Day, and his wife catered the event for 2 consecutive years, leading to her meeting him during the first year, and the rest is history. I used the term vendor because my own company would categorize this role as such. Last night at our home was very calm and peaceful, which was a relief. The 3 of us enjoyed a good dinner and even played some board games, including a surprisingly fun Titanic game. There was no discussion about their mother. I followed their lead, and since they didn't bring it up, neither did I. This morning, I organized our financial documents for my attorney. There are no financial secrets between us. I've had control of her personal accounts, as well as mine, since the first D-Day 3 years ago. While she also had access to my accounts, I managed all the transactions. I changed my account passwords on Sunday evening after I left. I've included instructions in the email for her to change her passwords. What's currently paid by each of us will remain the same unless the lawyer recommends changes after reviewing the documents. The only potential issue I see is that I'm currently covering the mortgage without living there. The lawyer might raise concerns about that, and I'll follow his guidance. During a phone call with him this morning, I also sought his advice regarding the therapist meeting. He suggested not committing either way for now, which seems prudent. On a personal note, I'm maintaining a healthy diet and exercise routine, which I learned is beneficial 3 years ago. My sleep has been a bit challenging, but not too bad. I don't drink or use drugs, so those aren't issues. Today, I plan to focus on some work and finalize plans for the weekend with my kids. Fortunately, there haven't been any traumatic or earth-shattering developments. Not much to update. Yesterday morning, the kids and I went hiking at a beautiful Canyon State Park, so I'm pretty sore. It was a fantastic time and helped us channel nervous energy and anger. We briefly returned home, rested for a couple of hours, and then they treated me to dinner and took me to an escape room. It was my first time in one, and I quite enjoyed it. I met my neighbors on Friday afternoon. They are a nice couple, seemingly in their early to mid-30s with kids. I mentioned this because I was still wearing my wedding ring, and the wife mentioned she looked forward to meeting my wife soon. I simply said she was no longer in the picture and took off the ring after we parted ways. I found it amusing that I hadn't realized I was still wearing it. The kids have decided to visit their grandmother today and mentioned they might check in on their mother. My daughter didn't seem thrilled about the decision, so I assume my son is mainly going for her. I encouraged them to go and take things slow. I also asked them to be respectful. I'll address a couple of posts that caught my attention later. Right now, I'm incredibly sore and in need of some relaxation. I'm not as young as I used to be. Final update here? Based on the past 24 hours, I've decided to stop updating here. Any further news should probably go under the Divorce Separation Forum. Would this thread get moved, or should I start a new one over there when I feel the need to update? After a long night of talking to my children individually, I decided we needed to get on the same page. So, I contacted their mother, and we discussed how to help the kids. She had some good suggestions, and we agreed to get some referrals for our son and encourage him to talk to someone. I even agreed to family counseling if that was the route we needed to go. She asked if I would turn my phone back on in case of an emergency with him, and I agreed. I even gave her my address, with the condition that she wouldn't abuse the ability to contact me so easily and wouldn't come over unless invited. I thought that was only fair since he has expressed a desire to stay with me for the foreseeable future, and she should know where he is staying. I sent her the email, and she read it while we were on the phone. She agreed to communicating this way as the default means. She asked about me meeting with her and the therapist, and I told her no. If she wanted to say anything, she should put it in an email, and I'd read it. We would go from there. She felt like something would get lost in reading it as opposed to her telling me face to face. I just blurted out that I already suspected she was going to tell me she had additional contact with him after D-Day. She cried and apologized and said she should have told me. I told her to write it in the email. I hung up, and at 3 a.m., according to the timestamp, she sent me the email. I'll summarize the email, I guess. After she left work early the day I got arrested, a female coworker came by to check on her. She told this person what had happened. The whole story. One thing led to another, and the girl offered her phone to my STBXW to call him after she expressed concern about the AP physically. He was all lovey and heartbroken and called her the love of his life and begged her to run away with him. She told him she was confused and she could not do that right now. In her words, she was an emotional blob not thinking right. They eventually hung up, and the coworker agreed to keep it quiet. The next day she claimed she came to her senses and reached out to marriage counseling services at our church, which is considered a megachurch with professional counseling available. Later that week, she went to them and told them everything that happened, except not about the phone call. They gave her the usual advice, which included no contact with AP, as breaking that contact post D-Day could jeopardize any attempt to reconcile. She was in panic mode about the call and decided not to tell anyone about it. The following week, while I was not at home and she was at work, the coworker told her that AP was blowing up her phone and she needed to talk to him. She claimed she did it to make him stop trying to get in contact with her. Unfortunately, to her surprise, he was furious. I had sent his wife screenshots of the Facebook messages and exposed his infidelity without warning my STBX. So, he was upset, yelling, and crying about his marriage and the fact that I beat him up, saying all he did was fall in love with a woman he can never go near again. She hung up and never spoke or saw him again until that Saturday night at the party. As for the drunken rant, she has no idea why she said what she said. She saw me looking at him and was scared I'd get into trouble again. She was afraid our reconciliation was going to take a hit. She admitted that, to my surprise, shock, and disgust, I felt a physical attraction to him briefly when I first saw him, in her own words. She then says she just went blank, had no idea how to handle it, and started grabbing drinks. She offered many apologies and begged for forgiveness. Her therapist mentioned something about not properly mourning the end of that relationship due to how fast it ramped up and ended, along with guilt associated with not telling me or her therapist about the 2 phone calls. She explained that her resentment toward me stemmed from the feeling that we had reached a plateau and were not progressing in our reconciliation over the last year. She believed that I was not fully committed, and she admits that she was frustrated and angry about that. She knew she wanted us to work out and grow old together, but I was still distant in some ways. She wanted to have that talk with me for over a month, but kept putting it off, and then the party happened. She feels it was just an unfortunate chain of events that came together and exploded. She pointed out that she had sent me a text asking about setting aside time to discuss our marriage, and she claims to have the text. But we never got around to it. Anyway, my reply was simply, "You lied for 3 years. How do I know you're not lying now?" Her reply was, "That's the problem I found myself in when you came back home. If I told you the truth, how could I prove it was only phone calls? I could only do then what I am doing now. Tell you and pray you believe me because I have no proof." But emotions were so raw, and I knew how badly I had messed up. I did not think we could take another blow to our marriage and survive. I'm sorry I kept this from you then. But that is the truth. All of it. So, that's it. Divorce is still on the table, but now that all the emotions have begun to clear, I am not as angry and more open to seeing this from her perspective. An actual physical separation for a period of time will definitely take place. We were separated in our home for 4 months following D-Day. I need actual distance right now. How long? I have no idea. At least 6 months. I am waiting on word from my attorney on a possible legal separation plan I have been thinking about. Once I hear from him, I'll post an update in the divorce separation forum. Thank you for letting me rant and post this train wreck here. It has really helped me to clear my mind. I have what I believe I came for, and that is a clear plan to assist my children and clarity of thought regarding my future, whatever the outcome. I'm not leaving. But other than answering any questions and hearing your take on the above, I see nothing that fits the category of just found out coming my way. Just to clarify, she left that job, and to my knowledge, has not spoken to that person since leaving after she turned in her notice. God, I feel like I'm defending her. Which she did a week after D-Day on her own accord based on the info she got from the marriage counselor. Just providing some clarification. Other than that, yeah, I know my worth, and it is not tied to her. To be honest, I am not 100% sure I was not already headed toward halting the reconciliation before this. She has a point. I was not 100% committed to the marriage anymore. Now, is that because I was settling or because I really could not get past the cheating? I think the separation will sort that out. I don't believe her mind is warped. I think she truly made systematic bad decisions based on selfish behavior and got caught up in a fantasy and was not prepared for the resulting reality. Pisses me off, but I really believe that